In the far future, the galaxy is already burning. Wars grind across a million worlds, and the Imperium calls it survival, calls it duty, calls it the Emperor's holy design. Yet even in a civilization built on fire and sacrifice, there are places where the flame feels watched, as if something older is waiting behind the heat. On the forge world of Warhammer Secundus, locked in a long warp storm at the edge of the ghoul stars, the air tastes of iron dust and promethium smoke. The sky above its hives is a bruised red smear, streaked by lightning that never quite touches the ground. Titans trade thunder in the distance, their footsteps shaking slag plains that once carried rivers of ore. Manufactorums roar day and night, bleeding exhaust through cathedral chimneys, while priests of steel chant prayers to machine spirits that no longer answer. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. Far below those hymns, darkness holds a different temperature. Beneath the primary forges, beneath the magma core reactors and the vaults where the Mechanicus stores its most dangerous relics, a sealed realm drinks heat like a black lung. The tech priests who mapped the depths called it a pre-imperial anomaly vault, a wound in the planet that should not exist. None alive remember when it was found, only that the stone around it refuses to melt, and the auspex around it hum with errors that taste like fear. The storm above has shaken the world for weeks, rattling old supports, dragging half-formed demons into the upper hives, pushing the priests into harsher rites. Each new alarm makes them dig deeper for answers, deeper for control. Inside that sealed realm, something stirs. Not with the flicker of warp energy, not with the cold logic of Xeno's machinery, but with the slow certainty of a volcano remembering its name. Chains older than the world bite into scorched flesh, runes carved by hands long dead holding a will that has never accepted obedience. A low breath rolls through the chamber, heavy as stone shifting under pressure. Heat gathers, not outward but inward, drawn to a center that has waited in silence for longer than the Imperium has spoken its first prayer. The realm around him is alien, layered with metal veins and prayer-etched concrete, yet the language of fire is the same in every universe. It hums in the bones, in the blood, in the spaces between thought and rage. Surtur wakes with calm certainty. Awareness returns like embers catching wind. Memory follows, not as comfort but as weight. Muspelheim's endless blaze, the eternal flame that crowned him, the long road toward Ragnarok, all of it sits behind his eyes like a horizon of ash. The twilight sword is not in his grasp yet, but its presence is felt through the stone, a familiar hunger resting just out of reach. The chains hold, but they do not define him. In the dark, his heartbeat becomes a furnace rhythm. The air around him wavers and brightens, metal sweating, old dust turning to sparks. A world built on industry, and war has buried him under its engines, thinking fire could be caged by stone and script. Above, alarms rise. Sensors read a fall in temperature where there should be none, a sudden emptiness in the flame that powers half the planet. Tech priests gather with ritual dread, mistaking the silence for a weapon's vault, a Necron snare, a warp shaft about to swallow their shrine world whole. Their chant cycles through binary hymns and prohibition codes, and the door begins to open because fear has always been the most faithful servant of curiosity. The seal breaks without explosion. No dramatic flare, no sky torn open, only a breath like the world exhaling after holding itself shut for ages. Light from the cutting torches falls into the chamber and touches him, and the fire giant rises into it as if the darkness had been a cloak, not a prison. The first thing the priests feel is heat so pure it makes their augmetics recoil. The second is absence, no warp-foul stench, no machine spirit signature, only raw living flame and a will that does not ask to be understood. Surtur steps forward, the ground hardening and cracking under that weight, and the forge world above seems to pause mid-roar. Something older than the Imperium's history stands inside its heart now, not summoned by the warp, not born of Xeno's science, but awakened by the simple truth that a galaxy this sick always calls for fire. And as the last fragments of the vault seal crumble at his back, the heat in his chest steadies into purpose, handing the moment forward like a torch into the coming war. V. Heralin Secundus burns the way dying stars burn, not in a single flare, but in a long, grinding fever that never cools. Trapped in the ghoul stars, wrapped in a warp storm for weeks beyond counting, the Forge world has become a sealed furnace of conflict and labor. Above the hive spires, the sky churns in bruised reds and sickly violets, lightning crawling through cloud layers like veins of living fire. The storm does not fall from above so much as press inward, smearing reality until the horizon looks half-imagined. Vox traffic stutters through static, astropathic signals vanish mid-prayer, and every orbiting ship that tried to break free has either fled blind into the dark or been swallowed by the storm's teeth. On the surface, war and industry share the same breath. Ash deserts stretch between hive clusters like dead oceans, their dunes layered with powdered bone, spent casings, and soot from manufactorums that have never stopped roaring. In those deserts, titans stride with solemn inevitability, god machines draped in banners that snap in heated wind. Each step crushes slag into glass. Volcano guns answer with thunder that rolls through the planet's ribs. When their shells land, the ground opens in incandescent craters that stay glowing for hours, as if the world itself is bleeding heat. Skitare legions march beneath those towering shadows, their augmetic hearts steady, their rifles silent until the command glyph flashes, then a storm of law's fire rakes through smoke and sand. Farther in, manufactorum districts scream under overload. Conveyor lines stall and restart like choking lungs. Plasma furnaces surge, venting bursts of white-blue flame that turn night into harsh noon. Great stacks belch promethium fumes in columns so thick they blot out entire sectors of sky. The air tastes of iron filings and burnt sanctity, sweet in a way that makes flesh want to cough and machines want to pray. Tech priests move through it all with oil-slick robes and clicking mechadendrites, chanting in binary cadence to soothe machine spirits that shiver under warp pressure. Some spirits answer with loyal purrs, others bite back, corruptions blooming in their logic like rust beneath paint. Every hour without relief forces harsher rites, deeper incantations, more incense tossed into hot air that was already choking. Yet through all this, another rhythm threads under the world's roar, faint but growing. It begins for Surtur as sensation rather than thought. The Forge world's heat brushes against memory that is older than the star system, older than any human name. Flames here feel engineered, controlled, bent into iron discipline, and that difference is like grit under the tongue. There is fire in the air, yes, but it is not free. It is caged in pipes, rationed by valves, worshipped like a relic instead of lived like a truth. Even the planet's magma core is treated as a servant, not a sovereign, a reactor rather than a heart. From deep below, the storm's pressure travels down through bedrock, through steel arteries, through sealed vaults that were never meant to be disturbed. The world above responds in small betrayals. Heat readings flicker. Ventilation fans spin up without order. A refinery district loses containment and melts itself into a river of molten metal. Each failure is recorded, each one blamed on the warp, each one adding to the quiet unease of priests who sense the forged spirit slipping from their hands. None of them think to name the older truth forming beneath their boots, because in the Imperium, any fire not sanctioned is called heresy or demon work, and both of those words are traps. Beneath the ash deserts and the cathedral stacks, beneath the Titans' marching thunder, the sealed depths hold their own kind of silence. The storm has made the whole world listen, and in that listening, something ancient finds space to breathe. Surtur feels the planet above as a vast, grinding bellows, feeding heat downward into darkness that swallows it hungrily. The Forge world is a furnace of war and industry, but every furnace has a core, and every core can be claimed. As the surface battles flare brighter and the manufactorums strain toward rupture, the air itself seems to lean toward the depths. carrying that rising pressure into the black. It is a slow pull, a secret tide, and it leads the moment forward with steady certainty, toward the place where fire is not made but awakened. Below Viheralen Secundus, the Forge world becomes something else entirely. The upper hives roar like a battlefield cathedral, but under them the planet turns quiet, layered in kilometers of rockcrete, heat shields, and forgotten strata where the Mechanicus drilled too deep and then sealed what it found. The descent is not a path so much as a tightening throat. Service shafts shrink, maintenance tunnels twist, and the air grows dense with old radiation and the bitter taste of sanctified oil. Every step downward is another step away from the Imperium's certainty, toward a darkness that does not care for prayers. Surtur feels that depth the way mountains feel weather. Awareness runs outward through flame and stone, sensing weight, pressure, distance, and the faint tremor of engines above. Heat comes down in steady pulses, drawn through conduits meant to feed reactors, but something in that flow is wrong. Fire should move like breath, should surge and spread, but here it is pulled inward, braided into rigid streams, caged by metal and doctrine. That cage irritates something ancient in him, not as sudden anger, but as a slow sharpening, the kind that comes when a blade remembers what it was forged to do. The sealed realm sits under the primary magma core reactor, like a buried heart no one speaks of. The tech priests named it an anomaly vault, then added pre-imperial to the title to excuse what they could not explain. Auspex readings always came back confused. Temperatures there dropped when they should rise, and rose when every law of physics said they should fall. The walls drank heat, not as a broken system does, but as a living thing might, feeding on fire the way a priest feeds on faith. Even the machine spirits nearest to that place were restless. Their logic loops stuttered. Their hymn codes devolved into static. Servoskulls sent to map the edges came floating back empty, optics scorched from the inside, as if something behind the stone had looked straight through them. Those details never reached Surtur as words, they reach as sensation. The vault is a cold mouth in a world of heat, and the cold is not the absence of flame but the denial of it, a force that has sat against his skin for ages longer than anyone alive can count. Chains bite at wrists and ribs, each link stamped with runes that do not belong to any Terran tongue. The sigils are older than the Forge world's crust, older than the first hymn to the Omnissiah, and even in their age they still hum with a stubborn refusal to yield. Around him the chamber is not natural rock. It is black stone fused with metal veins that do not melt. The floor is etched with circles within circles, not Mechanicus geometry, but something harsher, like a ritual drawn by hands that believed fire itself could be measured and owned. The air is thin, dry, and still, carrying the faint scent of sulfur and old ash. This place was built to sleep, to hold, to forget. Yet the warp storm above has pressed the planet for weeks, rattling foundations, shifting energies, thinning whatever barrier kept this realm wholly silent. In that thinning, the vault has begun to pull heat from the world, not greedily, not like a failing reactor, but in a slow, deliberate inhalation. That breath is what brushes Surtur's mind awake. It is not a call spoken in a language, but a pressure that says the prison is weakening, says the fire within no longer belongs to those who sealed it. The sense of the twilight sword lies beyond the chamber's far edge, muted but present, like a star buried under ash. The weapon has waited too, and its waiting is a familiar thing. The sword's pull is not command but memory, a reminder of purpose written into his bones. The vault can hold the body, but it cannot unmake what the eternal flame made. Above, the Forge world screams on, unaware that its deepest silence has started to breathe. Below, Surtur's furnace rhythm steadies, and the darkness around him tightens as if preparing to open. The moment does not rush. It gathers, slow and inevitable, carrying the story forward toward the hands that will soon reach for the seal. The first sign is not a quake or an explosion, but a wrongness in the numbers. In the Forge precincts above, heat litanies begin to falter. Thermic gauges that have held steady for centuries register sudden drops in the depths, as if a void has opened beneath the reactors to drink their flame. A magma core that should pulse like a sun under iron skin turns erratic, cooling in one sector while surging in another. The data streams spill into the noosphere in nervous bursts, and the priests of steel feel the flicker of something they do not understand. Mechanicus doctrine is full of rituals for corruption and breach, full of cautionary codices about sleeping Xenos technology or warp-tainted machine spirits. It has almost no language for the kind of absence now spreading through their systems. The Auspex read no standard warp signatures, no demonic infestation code, no Necron cold logic trace. Yet heat is vanishing, pulled downward into the sealed strata like breath into starving lungs. A world whose entire faith is built on controlling fire does not tolerate fire behaving on its own. Surtur senses the panic as a vibration through the stone, through conduits that tremble with hurried footsteps and escalating machine song. Their fear is sharp and metallic, and it comes closer with every hour. Even chained, even buried, awareness tastes the air turning frantic. Somewhere above, voices rise in binary cant, hissing through vox grills and incense fog. It is not the calm devotion of maintenance, but the harsher cadence used when the cult believes its gods are about to be stolen. Tech priests gather at the reactor shrines like crows around a carcass. Their robes are red with heat stains, their mechadendrites twitching as they interface with failing systems. They pull vast scrolls of data from cogitator stacks, cross-referencing anomalies against archives that reach back to the Great Crusade. Each attempt produces more uncertainty. The vault is a blank in their records, a sealed line in old maps stamped with warnings that no longer carry context. Some claim it is a pre-human relic, a pocket of forbidden archaeotech. Others whisper of Necron trickery, that a sleeping star god shard lies in the world's belly, cooling the forges so it can rise. A more frightened sect voices warp breach. The storm above has already torn reality in the upper hive levels, and demons claw at manufactorum halls. The cult has seen machine spirits turn rabid before, has watched servitors rip their own cables loose to strangle their masters under invisible whispers. Heat vanishing into the deep could mean a rift forming, a door to the Immaterium widening beneath their sacred engines. In their minds, the only answer to an unseen threat is to name it as something already hated. Their misnaming is a kind of prayer. It does not reach Surtur as insult, only as proof that this galaxy too is ruled by fear disguised as certainty. The priests do not ask what the vault is. They ask how to control it, how to purge it, how to force it back into known categories. The dogma is older than any individual life, and it moves through them like a machine-recited dream. Rites escalate. Skidara cohorts are summoned to perimeter posts deep in the maintenance undercities. Servoskulls drift downward in swarms, forming floating halos of lenses and saw teeth. Flamers are blessed, plasma cutters charged, melta rigs dragged through narrow shafts. The priests speak of containment, of purification, yet the scent of dread thickens in their circuitry. Their noosphere fills with low-level alarm cants that spread like fever. In the depths, the response feels almost gentle. The vault draws in more heat, not in reaction, but because waking requires fuel. Chains vibrate faintly as temperature shifts around them. The air closer to Surtur grows warmer, brighter, the way coals brighten before flame. Awareness sharpens into a calm blade. A universe of iron and doctrine is moving to open a door it should never touch, and the inevitability of that opening settles inside him like a slow, steady grin that does not need a mouth. The machine cult's panic becomes momentum. Momentum becomes decision. Decision becomes footsteps descending toward the sealed realm, carrying torches and worship into black stone that has waited for exactly this kind of fear. They come down in layers, priest after priest, with Skidara columns behind them like mechanical shadows. The descent is lit by lumen strips and drifting incense smoke, each passage lined with icons that warn against the impure. Servoskulls float ahead, their red optics tasting the air. The deeper they go, the more the forge world seems to narrow, as if the planet itself wants to swallow them before they reach what lies beneath. Yet faith is a force as stubborn as gravity. Their belief that all things can be classified into sacred order makes them brave in the worst way. At the vault's outer membrane, the world changes. Black stone replaces rockcrete, smooth and unmarked except for seams that do not align to any Mechanicus blueprint. Heat sensors red contradiction. The surfaces are cold enough to frost augmetic lenses, yet when melted torches touch them, the stone does not crack or glow, only drinks the heat and stays the same. That denial unsettles the priests. It means this thing is not a machine they can appease, not a demon they can banish by correct litanies, not even a relic they can interpret through known rites. Surtur feels the first bite of cutting tools through the stone like a distant itch. Not pain, just the faint pressure of reality being disturbed. The chains on his wrists tighten with old runes, responding to the seal's weakening as if to say hold, endure, remain asleep. The response is older and stronger than obedience. The muffled pull of the twilight sword sharpens behind the far wall, and awareness leans toward it. Not yet, the moment says, not until the door yields fully. Fire is patient in the way stone believes it is eternal. Ritual codes are spoken, not with joy but with the hard voice of necessity. Binary cants flow from vox grills, the priest's words steady and low, layered over the whine of plasma cutters and the hiss of coolant systems pushed beyond safe tolerance. One by one, seals break, glyphs of red wax melt, cogitators spool through forgotten access keys once written by hands that are now dust. The cult believes they are overriding a lock. In truth, they are removing a weight from a lid already straining to lift. The final cut comes quiet. That hush is the strangest part. No eruption of warp light, no scream from a machine spirit, no rushing heat wave. Only silence, thick and deep, the kind of silence found in volcanic caverns before the earth decides to move. The door splits open, and the air on both sides seems to hold its breath. Cold rushes outward, not the cold of emptiness, but the cold of something consuming heat so completely that it leaves a vacuum behind. Lenses frost. Metal shrinks with a sudden ping. A few skidari stumble as their temperature regulators fail. The priests do not retreat. Fear turns into stubbornness, stubbornness into theology. If the artifact resists heat, they say, then heat must be applied harder. They step inside, lumen lights casting thin cones across the chamber. Those beams catch chains drawn taut across scorched stone, catch runes burned into the floor that do not match any Martian catechism. The stench of sulfur rises, old as a myth, then their lights find the shape in the center. Surtur stands where the darkness gathered him. Flame is not yet a crown, only a simmering presence under skin like magma behind rock. The giant's size is beyond their holy schematics. The weight of him seems to bend the air. Eyes open, ember-red, carrying memory of worlds that burned before Terra knew its first empire. The priests feel it, a will that does not look for permission. Their augurs sweep wildly, hunting for warp readouts and finding none. That absence terrifies them more than any positive signal. A skidare gun clicks up. A tech priest Dominus lifts a mechadendrite toward a control rune that does not answer. Hands tremble, and some part of their doctrine whispers that this is beyond classification. Another part insists all things are subject to sacred order. Surtur takes one step forward. The chain links groan. The chamber brightens with heat that rises in a slow tide. The priest's breaths become short, their lenses fogging. The door that should not open has opened, and what stands inside is not a relic to be catalogued. It is an ending that once walked toward Ragnarok and has now awakened in a galaxy that thinks apocalypse belongs only to the warp. The cult's fear hardens into action, and in that hardening the first sparks of confrontation gather, passing the moment forward into the first flare of war. The giant fills the chamber like a furnace discovering air. Chains still cling to wrists and ribs, but their meaning has already begun to fade. Runes on the links burn dull red as if heated from within, then darken again, struggling to keep hold. Surtur's posture is not an animal waking startled. It is a king rising from a throne buried too long, slow, sure, and filled with the silent promise that sleep has ended. Flame does not explode outward. It collects around him in breathing waves, controlled not by machines or warp tides, but by the ancient truth of fire answering its lord. The tech priests freeze. Their optics catalog height, mass, thermal output. Their noosphere searches for a label that might diffuse panic. Demon, some systems suggest. Xeno's god, others spit back. Cetan's shard, the most frightened whisper. Every category fails because the signals are wrong. A creature from the warp should taste of the Immaterium, should crawl with psychic static. A machine-born relic should ring with code. This being is raw, elemental heat. Not corruption, not circuitry, just the old spine of flame that existed before the warp learned to mimic it. Surtur feels their fear like the crackle of dry wood. It is small, sharp, and familiar. In other ages, smaller gods had screamed before his steps, yet this is not Muspelheim. The air is laced with promethium residue, incense, and tasted prayers. The walls are stamped with a faith that believes fire must be rationed, contained, made obedient. That faith irritates him more than their weapons. It is the same arrogance that once built Asgard's towers and thought law could bind inevitable ending. The chamber heats quickly. Metal supports sweat and drip. Rockcrete at the vault entrance fractures as expansion fights confinement. Skitare regulators shriek, trying to cool their bodies as the world around them climbs toward ignition. Some step back. Others lift rifles, because that is how their doctrine teaches them to greet the unknown. Flame swells across Surtur's shoulders. A crown of burning hair stirs like a solar wind. Vast hands curl, the weight of the chains making a low clatter. Not with struggle, more like irritation at a remembered inconvenience. The breath that rolls from his lungs is thick with heat, and with it comes memory, a realm of endless blaze, the eternal flame feeding power. The twilight sword waiting to split a sky, the long march toward a final dawn that was never meant to be gentle. His eyes fall on the priests, and in the close third-person pull of awareness, they are seen not as individuals but as a culture. Their augmetics flicker and click. Their devotion is sincere, but sincere does not mean wise. They have built a galaxy of iron cages and call it order. They have painted fear gold and call it faith. The knowledge does not arrive as a philosophical thesis. It arrives as instinct, the way a volcano knows the shape of the mountain sitting over it. One priest steps forward, mechadendrites extended, codes scrolling across a wrist screen. The words come steady and low, the cadence of a rite meant to command machine spirits. It means nothing to him. The language of fire is older than their dialect. He does not answer. He does not need to. A presence like this does not negotiate with tools that cannot understand its nature. A skidare volley snaps out. La's beams cut bright lines across the chamber. They vanish into Surtur's aura, diffusing like sparks in a sunlit forge. Another shot follows, plasma this time, bursting against his chest in a bloom that should crater ceramite. The flare washes over skin like warm rain. His focus shifts with calm certainty and the air obeys. Heat rises in a directed surge, a simple extension of will. The floor ripples. Bolts in nearby supports shear in soft pops. The rifles in the skidare hands glow cherry red, then slump into molten metal that drips between their fingers. Surtur takes another step, and the chamber seems to kneel under the weight. Chains drag. Runes on the links flicker again, weaker this time. The flame around him steadies, not wild, but sovereign. This galaxy has woken him without knowing what it has done, and every heartbeat now beats toward a purpose the Imperium cannot record. The priest's shock hangs in the air like smoke, while the first true clash gathers, handing the moment forward into their frightened attempt to respond. Fear turns into doctrine faster than thought. The tech priests recoil, then lock their reactions into ritual certainty. An unknown presence in the forge world's belly must be purged, contained, or sanctified, and the only tool they trust is force. Skidare commanders transmit kill cants through the noosphere. Servoskulls dive low, tracing targeting arcs. A dominus raises a phosphor flamer, whispering blessings that make the pilot light burn a sacred blue. Their world is built on the belief that fire belongs to them, and anything that refuses that ownership becomes heresy by definition. Surtur watches the movement with a stillness that has nothing to do with mercy. The awareness in him reads their intent as plainly as smoke on wind. They are frightened animals wrapped in steel prayers, and their aggression is born from the same weakness that makes empires crumble the moment they meet something they cannot categorize. The feeling does not spark humor. It deepens the slow, cold rage that defines purpose. This is a galaxy in decay, and decay always fights renewal first. The first line advances. Law's carbines chatter. Staccato beams lace the vault, cutting harsh green flashes against black stone. Their heat is cheap, controlled, measured. It is not the kind of flame that can stand before a fire giant who once drank from the eternal flame itself. The beams strike his aura and scatter, leaving only bright motes that fade before they can become harm. A volley of plasma follows, heavier, more desperate. The bursts splash across Surtur's torso, lighting him in white glare. They fail in the same way water fails against lava, evaporating without leaving a mark. His response comes steady and low, not spoken aloud, but carried through the chamber in a shift of air and radiance. A hand lifts, chained wrist groaning, and the temperature spikes as if the vault has opened onto a sun. Fire surges outward in a wave, not random, not warp-fed, but elemental and exact. Skitaric armor softens, joints locking as metal turns pliant. Augmetic optics cloud. Those nearest stagger, skin beneath plating blistering under sudden heat. The weaker ones drop, not dead yet, but overcome by a world that has become too hot to breathe. A flamer roars. Promethium arcs toward him in a sacred stream. The fire touches his aura and folds into it, absorbed like tribute. Promethium is fuel, and fuel has always belonged to flame's true master. The priest holding the weapon freezes, systems screaming overload as the tank at his back swells under reverse pressure, then melts into a puddle that traps his legs. Panic rises in a chorus of machine voices. Surtur steps toward them. The floor cracks, lines of molten glow spidering outward under each movement. Chains drag behind, their runes fading to a sullen black. His size makes the chamber feel smaller, more fragile, as if any part of it could be turned to slag with a breath. Their prayers become frantic. A dominus begins a banishment rite, trying to force a warp label onto something that is not warp-born. The words come dry and brittle, and they die in the heat. The Skidare fall back, still shooting because retreat without fire is not in their programming. A few attempt to flank through side corridors. Their boots scrape stone that is already warming under his presence. In those narrow passages, fire reaches first. Walls glow, then droop, turning corridors into molten throats. The soldiers who entered do not return. Their voxgalls end in static and the smell of scorched oil. In the close pull of Surtur's awareness, there is no triumph in this, only confirmation. The Imperium fears what it cannot cage. The machine cult worships fire but does not understand it. Their horror is the horror of owners watching a thing they claimed rise and refuse them. Behind their retreat, the vault's deeper wall trembles faintly. The twilight sword waits beyond it, and the pull grows stronger with every heartbeat. The first contact has ended the only way it could, in heat and misunderstanding, and the forge world above begins to feel the change in its core. The moment hands itself forward into the next widening circle of war, as word of the fire giant spreads upward through steel cathedrals and smoke. Heat follows him upward like a cloak remembering its owner. The vault corridor that once felt like a throat now feels like a riverbed filling with lava, slow and inevitable, carrying fire where steel once ruled. Behind, the tech priests retreat in broken order, their noosphere bursting with alarm cants that try to compress what they witnessed into a usable warning. Their systems cannot decide if the presence is demon, xenos, or relic. The only thing they agree on is danger. That shared fear spreads through the undercity conduits and into the primary forge stacks, and those who hear it fill the empty space with imagination sharper than truth. Surtur moves through the depths without hurry. Chains still hang from wrists and waist, but their runes have dulled to ash. Each step brings a shift in the world's rhythm. The air grows hotter, not chaotic, but focused, as if all flame in this place is being tuned to a single note. Pipes hum. Pressure valves chatter in sympathetic bursts. Lumen strips flicker from white to amber, then fail as plastic housings soften. A forge world lives on controlled heat, and controlled heat is beginning to remember what it was before control. The first organized resistance forms at a transit junction where maintenance tunnels widen into a cavernous service hall. Skidara cohorts line the entrances, weapons braced. Heavy servitors clank into firing positions, plasma culverins whining as they charge. Their commanders do not wait for more data. Doctrine demands that an unclassified threat be met with overwhelming firepower, and so they give that fire to him as if fire were something they could spend. Law's beams arc in bright curtains. Plasma bolts howl like miniature suns. A Melta team sends a cone of collapsing heat meant to liquefy armor and flesh alike. None of it lands the way they intend. Law's flickers into his aura and dies as sparks. Plasma blossoms against his chest and is swallowed into the larger furnace of his body, becoming fuel as natural as breath. The Melta cone touches the air around him and splays outward, turning into a wavering halo that only adds to the rising temperature. The Skitare feel their own weapons betray them, barrels glowing red-hot, capacitors overloading in their hands. A few step back in confusion, not because fear is in their programming, but because survival subroutines scream louder than ritual. Surtur lifts both arms, chain links grinding like distant thunder. Fire responds at once, not warp-fed lightning, not machine spirit venting, but elemental flame shaped by will. The floor becomes a subtle mirror of his intent. Metal grating buckles, then flows outward in slow waves, destabilizing firing lines. Support columns soften, not collapsing randomly, but sagging away from him, creating open space where a giant can walk unimpeded. The air itself becomes weaponized heat, heavy enough to pull breath from throats and turn lungs into cinders. Soldiers nearest to him drop without visible wounds, their systems shutting down as flesh beneath armor cooks in silence. One servitor tries to close distance, chain-fist whirring machine spirit screaming a blocky hymn. The giant's hand catches the arm mid-swing. Metal groans, then tears free under a strength that does not need augmentation. The servitor falls backward, its torso already melting into the floor. Another charges, a heavy arc flamer roaring terror into the hall. Promethium washes over Surtur's legs and is absorbed, the flame bending inward like a bowed head. The tank at the servitor's back heats past tolerance, then ruptures in a thick orange bloom that rolls across the junction and eats the air. The Skidari line begins to break. Their retreat is not a rout, it is a failing equation. They were built to face demons and xenos, to interpret threats by known rules. Every instinct says this giant is a god of fire, but their creed insists fire is a tool. That contradiction leaves them helpless. Surtur does not chase. A slow sweep of the twilight sword's absent memory guides his next motion. With a calm exhale, a tide of flame surges across the service hall, sealing exits in molten curtains. The last shots fade into a rising roar that feels less like battle and more like a furnace door closing. When the heat settles, the junction is a ruin of soft metal and ash. The forge world above has felt a new pulse in its core, and the pulse is not one their prayers can control. Surtur turns toward higher levels with steady purpose, carrying the moment forward as a rising inevitability. As the undercity corridors empty ahead of him, silence replaces gunfire. The forge world's heartbeat is still there, deep and constant, but around Surtur the noise thins into a hush that feels almost respectful. A giant does not need to stride fast to make space. Space is given as a reflex. In the dim maintenance arteries, servo skulls retreat into side vents, and distant Skidara patrols choose not to meet him head-on. Their fear has matured into caution, and caution spreads faster than zealotry when survival is on the line. Yet something else pulls through the stone, an older call than alarms. The twilight sword lies nearby, sealed in its own chamber, fathered from the same myth that birthed him. The sense of it is not a voice but a gravitational certainty. Fire answers fire, and a weapon forged for endings does not remain asleep when its wielder walks again. The closer he gets, the more that pull sharpens, threading through rock and iron like a hot wire. The chamber housing the blade is not Mechanicus design. It sits in a pre-imperial pocket of black stone similar to the vault, but smoother, less scarred, as if time inside was forced to stand still. The door is ringed with runes that have no binary equivalent. They are not wards against warp corruption, not machine spirit locks. They are restraints written by hands that understood how dangerous a true apocalypse can be. A wiser age hid the sword separately, knowing that ending without a bearer is chaos in its purest form. Surtur arrives before the seal and pauses. Awareness presses against it. The air around the door warms, not from anger, but from recognition. A chain still drags at his wrist, but the runes on it have gone dark, their authority spent. The seal on the sword is stronger, and it must be met by something stronger than simple heat. The giant's palm rises and rests against the stone. Fire gathers along his arm and into his chest, drawing on the eternal flame's memory the way lungs draw on air. With calm certainty, power flows outward. The black door does not explode. It softens, then crumbles inward like cooled lava returning to ash. Runes flare once, trying to hold their shape, then melt into glowing lines that slide down the stone and vanish. Behind that door, the chamber breathes out heat like a sigh. The twilight sword rests in a cradle of volcanic glass and iron. Dark metal drinks the lumen light around it. Its edge does not gleam, it absorbs, as if the blade is a knight that learned to cut. Even without a hand on its hilt, the sword radiates ancient magic, not warp sorcery, not psychic noise, but something tied to the bones of worlds. This weapon is Ragnarok's promise made solid. It knows what it was born to do. When Surtur reaches for it, the moment tightens. The chain on his arm shudders once, then fractures at the wrist with a dry snap, links falling to the floor like dead skin. The remaining chains slacken and fall away as if shamed. His fingers close around the hilt, and the sword responds. Flame surges up his arm, not burning him but fusing with him, binding wielder and weapon into a single silhouette of purpose. The chamber brightens, then darkens, as if light itself chooses to step back. Outside, distant reactors spike as if sensing a new master. In the noosphere above, tech priests feel a pulse that does not translate into data, only dread. The Forge world's fires, caged for millennia, taste a sovereign flame and begin to align. Surtur lifts the twilight sword, and the air around the blade shivers. The weapon's weight is not physical alone. It is history, fate, and ending. A giant who once marched toward Asgard with this sword now stands in the belly of an Imperium that mistakes control for strength. The handoff is quiet but clear. With the blade in his grasp, the story moves from awakening into conquest, and the Forge world begins to bow without yet understanding why. The first changes rise through the underhives like heat through stone. They are not announced by vox proclamations or ritual bells. They arrive as symptoms a dying system cannot hide. Furnace stacks that have fought overload for weeks suddenly stabilize. Magma pumps surge without command, drawing fresh lava up toward industrial arteries as if answering a pulse from below. Promethium reserves thin mysteriously, not stolen by thieves, but consumed by a hunger in the planet's bones. Lumen grids dim in some districts, while others glare brighter, their power rerouting against the logic of Mechanicus control. Surtur does not order these shifts. His presence is enough. The twilight sword rests against his side, and around it the air feels denser, hotter, as if the world's furnace wants to climb into the blade's shadow. He walks through the deeper Manufactorum caverns where iron rivers run in trenched channels and machine spirits groan under warp pressure. Servitors on gantries freeze as he passes. Their tracking optics cannot reconcile scale. Their subroutines hesitate, then fail, leaving them suspended mid-task like statues caught in ashfall. In these halls, fire is worshipped like a saint. yet treated like a slave. Every flame is measured, every heat vent regulated, every surge punished as deviation. The contradiction is obvious to him the way frost is obvious to a volcano. His steps bring that contradiction to the surface. Temperatures rise along his path, not exploding into chaos, but settling into a new equilibrium that makes older control algorithms meaningless. Cooling vents shriek and then quiet. Safety runes blink in warning spirals that no priest can decode in time. Steel beams sweat and soften, then re-harden into shapes that defy blueprint, as if the forge world is resculpting itself to suit the will moving through it. The upper hives begin to feel it as well. Citizens in industrial hab blocks pause mid-shift when floor plates grow warm under their boots. Some think the reactors are failing. Others whisper that the warp storm has finally broken containment. Prayer circles form in maintenance alcoves. A few drop to their knees before furnace altars, speaking a catechism for mercy. There is no mercy in what rises, only renewal, but the weak do not know how to name renewal without faith. Skidari patrols retreat into layered perimeters. Their commanders send hard-coded orders to avoid direct engagement, to track the anomaly's movement, and wait for further instruction. No one wants to admit that further instruction does not exist. The tech priests above argue in binary bursts across the noosphere. One sect demands exterminatus protocols, convinced this is a demon or Xeno's god too large to contain. Another sect, more radical and hungry, argues that the giant is a gift, a living avatar of flame that could be turned against the warp incursion choking their world. Both sects share the same fatal assumption that fire can be owned. Surtur senses their debate as distant static. It does not shape his path. The forge world is a tool and a cradle, and it feels like Muspelheim twisted into iron. The smell of promethium and molten ore is close enough to home that memory rises like a slow burn, yet home is not in front of him. This galaxy is, and the galaxy reeks of stagnation. The warp storm above is a chaos that pretends to be change, but all it offers is endless hunger without purpose. The Imperium below offers order without life. Both systems are brittle, both are waiting for something to break them into something new. As he passes a cathedral-sized reactor shrine, the flame within its core flares high, stretching toward him through a glass containment wall. Heat sensors spike, alarms begin to wail, then die. The flame settles again, calmer, brighter, as if a wild animal has found its alpha. The sight makes nearby priests fall silent. Some make the sign of the Omnissiah, others step back in fear. A few simply watch, their augmetic minds struggling to accept that a world built on fire is now answering to fire without their permission. The forge world is beginning to bow, not to metal, not to warp, but to a sovereign blaze that does not ask to be worshipped, only obeyed by nature. That surrender is slow, almost tender, like slag cooling into a new shape. It carries the moment forward into broader consequence, because anything that changes a forge world's heart changes a sector's war. Warp storms are not silent things. They ripple with thought, with hunger, with the distant laughter of gods that feed on terror. The one strangling Viheralen Secundus has already torn open factory halls and vomited demons into ash deserts. It has already given the ruinous powers a foothold in the planet's sphere. Yet when Surtur's awakening spreads through the world like a rising forge flame, the storm itself reacts, as if a stranger fire has entered its blood. Across the upper hives, cultists feel it before commanders do. In collapsed underchurches and hidden manufactorum chapels, fire-worshipping heretics lift their heads at the same instant. The sensation is not a clear message, only a thrill, a sudden narrowing of attention. They have prayed to Korn, to Tzinch, to any power that promised strength in a dying age. Now something vast and hot stirs beneath their feet, and their broken faith interprets it as a gift. A new god of flame, they whisper, sent through the storm to scorch the emperor's lie. They gather in ragged processions through maintenance ducts, bringing chain blades, scavenged lasguns, and crude brass icons sewn into skin. Sorcerers among them spill blood into furnace grates, chanting warp syllables to call their patrons closer. They believe their rituals are summoning the fire. In truth, the fire has already woken, and it does not belong to them. That misunderstanding is the seed of their doom. In the ash deserts beyond the hives, demonic presences begin to thicken. Bloodletters materialize from scorched machinery. Fleshhounds crawl out of breached conduits, their eyes lit by warp embers. They are drawn by the scent of war and the promise of a mighty skull. Their across-the-warp instincts say there is a champion to claim, a new engine of rage to bend into Khorne's service. The storm feeds their confidence, swelling their forms as they stalk toward the hive arteries that lead down. Surtur feels them approaching long before they arrive. Their presence is a different kind of heat, feverish, unstable, flavored with the warp's mimicry. It is fire that does not understand fire, flame that burns only to feed a god's appetite. In him, ancient rage stirs in response, not the blind fury of chaos, but the cold, certain wrath of a being made for endings. There is no curiosity about them. There is only the recognition of a false apocalypse rushing to meet a true one. The cultists reach the lower manufactorum tiers first. They find molten corridors and melted gun emplacements, and they cheer, thinking this proves their interpretation. They paint their faces with ash and blood, rushing downward into the tightening heat. In their minds, they will kneel before this fire god and be made strong, or they will die close enough to be noticed. Either outcome feels holy to them. The demons arrive behind them, snarling through smoke. Their brass weapons gleam with a heat that is not physical. They slice through cultists who stand in their way because Khorne cares nothing for whose blood flows. The cultists do not even resist. They see slaughter as blessing. That madness rolls ahead of the demonic tide, announcing chaos in the language of screams. Above, Imperial forces detect a surge in hostile movement and prepare defensive lines. Tech priests debate in rising alarm. But chaos has moved first, as it always does when it scents something new to corrupt. The storm thickens for a moment, like a lung drawing breath, and the lower levels fill with red-lit shadow. Surtur turns toward the oncoming warp-born horde with the twilight sword in hand. The sword's dark edge drinks the flickering light, and the fire around him steadies into something almost ceremonial, a calm before the burn. Chaos believes it has found a weapon. It is about to learn the difference between flame that serves hunger and flame that serves fate, and that lesson carries the moment forward into slaughter. The first wave comes fast, unburdened by caution. Bloodletters spill through a breached service archway, their bodies carved from muscle and hate, brass axes raised high. Their feet leave molten prints in metal grating already softened by his presence. Warp fire rolls off them in feverish flickers, and their thoughts are simple. A single chant of violence that pulses through the storm like a drumbeat. Behind, fleshhounds crouch low, their jaws unhinging as they scent a kill worthy of song. Surtur waits in the center of a wide forge hall where conveyor belts stand frozen mid-run and slag pools simmer in the floor's low channels. The close third-person pulse of awareness keeps him grounded in purpose. These are creatures of borrowed flame, reflections of rage without direction. Their heat tastes wrong, and wrongness is enough. The twilight sword lifts. There is no flourish, no wasted movement. A single sweep opens the air. The blade cuts through demon flesh and brass like both are smoke. The leading bloodletter explodes into ash and dissolving warp ichor, its scream cut short as the sword's dark edge severs its tie to reality. Two more leap from opposite sides. Their axes descend in crossing arcs meant to split him open. Fire rises from his skin in a slow surge, thickening the air into an incandescent barrier. The axes bite into that barrier, then melt, their brass flowing away in glowing drips before they can touch him. Flame answers intent. A breath rolls out, and the forge hall becomes a furnace mouth. The nearest demons stagger, their bodies losing coherence under heat that is older and purer than the warp can imitate. Their regeneration fails, not because they are banished by psychic right, but because there is nothing left to regenerate. Warp stuff is burned down to the idea of ash. Fleshhounds break from the pack, sprinting low across the grating. They are fast, predatory, used to tearing through mortals who flinch at their shape. Their jaws snap at his calves. A stomp lands like a meteor. The nearest hound bursts into a smear of burning shadow. Another lunges, and a hand catches it midair, fingers close with calm certainty. The creature's spine cracks. Fire pours through its mouth and eyes, and what falls to the floor is not a body, only scattered embers that fade into nothing. The forge depth air keeps rising in temperature. Pipes above glow. Rivets pop. The world's industrial heart is being turned into a battlefield that belongs to him. Demons keep coming because their nature does not allow retreat. Their numbers swell, a tide of red and brass pushed forward by the storm's hunger. In that tide, a few cultists still live, screaming praises as they rush toward him, hoping to be recognized. The demons cut them down without pause. Their blood splashes across the grating and evaporates before it can pool. Surtur steps forward into the oncoming mass. Each motion sends a low tremor through the hall. The twilight sword rises and falls in deliberate arcs. Every strike is an ending, clean and absolute. Fire surges between swings, a living wall that herds the horde into tighter clusters before consuming them. The demons begin to understand late. This is not a champion to corrupt. This is a fire that does not speak their language, and their brass hearts feel something they have not felt in millennia, a thinning of certainty into something like fear. The last bloodletters falter, their axes shake. A final roar tries to fill the space left by dying confidence. The twilight sword answers with one clean thrust, and the roar collapses into ash. Silence returns to the forge hall, broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the steady breath of a giant who has not even quickened. Chaos has tested the flame beneath Warhammer Secundus and found its sovereign. The warp storm above trembles with that realization, and every surviving cultist who felt the same pull now understands it was not a gift meant for them. The moment hands itself forward into widening consequence, because a fire that can burn demons without prayer will draw attention from every throne in the sector. Word travels through Warhammer Secundus. The way smoke climbs a shaft, fast, choking, unstoppable. Servoskulls that survive the lower depths drift upward with scorched lenses and corrupted picked feeds. Skidara commanders broadcast fragmented threat reports into the noosphere, their binary cant stripped of reassurance. Those reports reach the upper hive bastions, where Imperial Guard regiments are dug in against the warp-spawned riots already tearing at the Manufactorum districts. They also reach the red-lit cathedrals of the Mechanicus, where tech priests gather around cogitator shrines that cannot agree on what they are seeing. Surtur feels the disturbance above as a widening tension in the world's heat lines. Fear changes airflow, changes the rhythm of machines, changes the way a planet breathes. The Forge world is listening now, not to its priests, but to the old fire walking inside it. That listening makes the upper levels restless. Their alarms are louder than before, their prayers harsher. In the close third-person pull of his awareness, the Imperium reveals itself as an organism made of discipline and panic stitched together. It is not evil, it is fragile. At the primary command, Citadel Colonel Commandant Rothen of the Warhammer PDF stands beneath a hololithic map that flickers with warp interference. Guard officers report outbreaks of demonic incursions and cultist riots. Adeptus Mechanicus Dominus architects interrupt with new data, a massive thermal anomaly moving upward from the underforges, leaving melted corridors in its wake. Their voices do not need to be heard to be understood. Surtur reads them through the planet's nervous system, a distant clatter of human urgency. The human commanders want a label. Their training demands it. If the threat is a demon, call the Ordo Malleus. If Xenos, request Deathwatch. If an archaeotech weapon, secure it for Mars. Everything in their doctrine begins with classification, because classification is how the Imperium survives a galaxy built to kill it. Yet every attempt collapses. Auspex shows no warp signature. Psychona scanners find no Immaterium bleed. The creature is not known, and the unknown in 40K is the most dangerous kind of enemy. They argue about firepower. Some want immediate saturation bombardment of the lower hives to bury whatever rises beneath kilometers of rockcrete before it reaches population centers. Others warn that the Forge World's reactors cannot survive another quake, not with the warp storm already stressing the planet's crust. Tech priests push for containment rituals and sacred overrides, insisting the anomaly may be an ancient asset, perhaps even a shard of divinity that could be redirected. Their minds reach for hope the way drowning hands reach for surface. The Inquisition enters the debate like a blade sliding into a wound. A priority vox pulse from the sector's Ordo Hereticus detachment arrives through crackling static. The language is formal, absolute, demanding biometric scans, threat grading, and immediate quarantine of the anomaly site. The order carries the cold habit of millennia. Anything unclassified that shows power beyond sanctioned channels must be secured or destroyed, because the Imperium has learned what happens when it hesitates. Surtur feels that cold habit as a faint pressure in the air. It does not intimidate, it clarifies. The rulers of this galaxy are already moving to cage him, even while chaos bleeds at their gates. Their fear is not of death, but of change they cannot control. That recognition settles into his furnace heart like iron placed in a forge, ready to be reshaped. Above, defensive lines tighten. Basilisk batteries pivot toward inner hive approach vectors. Void shield relays reinforce around the central spires. Skidare maniples deploy to choke points with grav cannons and plasma arrays, their commanders ordered to delay rather than engage. In the noosphere, a sealed designation begins forming, something like Codamber Anomalous Entity, unsanctioned God-class threat. The name is not important, the intent is. Down below, Surtur's steps continue, steady and unhurried. The twilight sword rests heavy in hand, and the world's heat sings around it. The Imperium is scrambling to decide whether this flame is salvation or damnation. Their decision will arrive too late to matter, and that inevitability carries the moment forward as he climbs toward the surface war. The climb upward leads through corridors carved for machines, not giants, yet walls soften and fold away under his passing, granting room as if the forge itself is reshaping to his silhouette. Along the route, the world speaks in fragments, not words, but impressions carried through heat, fear, and the echo of minds pressed close by war. The Imperium is everywhere, stamped into steel, into incense, into the way even dying men whisper prayers instead of curses. That devotion is a kind of fuel, bitter and bright, and it tells Surtur more than any language could. He moves through a manufactorum quarter where riots have already broken out. Warp taint rots discipline. Guardsmen fight cultists among conveyor belts and stacked crates of ammunition. The air chokes with promethium smoke and the metallic bite of law's discharge. Bodies lie in piles where machinery never stopped running, gears chewing cloth and bone alike. It is a world that eats its own and calls the noise of it duty. Surtur does not stop to watch, yet awareness takes it in. These mortals are not weak by nature. They are made weak by a system that demands obedience over growth. Their leaders tell them the Emperor protects, and they cling to that promise like a lifeline, even as their cities burn. Faith here is not comfort. Faith is a muzzle. It keeps a million worlds from tearing apart, but it also keeps them from ever becoming more than they are. The contradiction sits plain in his mind, a slow fire of understanding rather than sudden rage. Warp corruption flares nearby when a demon crawls from a ruptured smelter. It is a squat, horned thing, claws dripping ichor onto metal that hisses as it melts. It lunges at a fleeing worker. The twilight sword lifts in a short arc. The demon splits, dissolving into ash that scatters across the floor and vanishes before it can stain. There is no sanctified banishment, no psychic rite, only ending, delivered with the same certainty that once ended palaces in Asgard. More demons appear as the storm above pushes down. Lesser things, hungry things, drawn by chaos in the streets. They rush him and flame answers without effort. A heat wave rolls out. Warp flesh blackens and peels. their screams cut off as their existence burns away. The workers nearby drop to their knees in terrified awe. Guardsmen recoil, weapons half raised. Their minds cannot reconcile a giant who kills demons but carries no warp stink. Their faith wants to call him angel. Their doctrine wants to call him heresy. Both names are too small. Surtur senses their confusion and learns from it. This galaxy's war is not a single conflict. It is a condition. It has been fighting so long that violence has become the language of survival, and survival has become worship. The warp pretends to be the source of all fire, yet it is only a mirror of mortal rage, fattened into gods. The Imperium pretends to be order, yet its order is a corpse held upright by sacrifice. The landscape of belief is a forge that never cools, and all forges eventually produce either weapons or chains. The realization does not soften him, it sharpens purpose. Ragnarok was not destruction for its own sake. It was renewal, a cycle that clears rot so something stronger can rise. In this galaxy, rot has been left to thicken for 10,000 years. It has a different scale, a different cruelty, but the same need. A fire that only consumes without rebuilding is chaos. A fire that never burns is stagnation. The path between them is thin, and it belongs to the one who can hold flame steady. As he moves onward, flames in nearby furnaces flare higher, leaning toward him. The twilight sword feels heavier, not in burden but in meaning. The galaxy is revealing its shape to him through war, and each revelation pushes him closer to the surface where greater threats are gathering. The moment hands itself forward, quiet but unstoppable, into the first true trial against the Imperium's other enemy. The Forge world's mid-layers open into a transit canyon once used for ore convoys, now torn into a battlefield by weeks of warp disruption. Rails are twisted like dead vines. Cranes hang broken over slag pits that glow a dull orange. Broken hab blocks lean at odd angles, their lower levels gutted by riots and demonic raids. In the center of the canyon stands the thing chaos has sent to claim him, a war engine of brass and bone, the size of a knight, dragging a chain axe that sparks against rockcrete. It is not a mindless beast. Warp runes crawl across its armor like living sores. A demon's consciousness sits inside the machine, fused to pistons and reactor cores, steering it with hatred and hunger. Its chest cavity is a furnace mouth that exhales black flame. Horns curve from a skull-shaped prow. The engine's Vox release is a roar that shakes dust from the canyon walls and calls lesser cultists to rally under its shadow. They believe their god has arrived to bind the fire giant. Surtur steps into the canyon without quickening pace. The twilight sword hangs low at his side, trailing heat that makes the air shimmer. The war engine raises its chain axe and charges, servo motors whining like tortured animals. Each step makes the ground quake, each swing of its weapon leaving a trail of warp fire that tries to cling to reality. The first strike comes down with the weight of siege artillery. Surtur meets it with the flat of the twilight sword. Metal screams. The impact throws a shockwave through the canyon, shattering cracked windows, sending slag dust into the air. The giant's feet dig into softened ground, yet the stance holds. The sword does not bend. Its dark edge drinks the engine's warp flame, turning the contact into a hiss of dying corruption. The engine recoils, then lashes forward with its furnace mouth, vomiting a cone of black fire meant to corrupt and consume. That fire is warp spawn, feverish, hungry. It washes over Surtur's torso and folds into his aura like smoke into a larger blaze. Elemental flame does not become corrupted by imitation. It consumes the imitation. The black fire turns orange, then white, then disappears into the heat around him. With calm certainty, he advances. One hand lifts toward the engine's chest. Fire gathers along his palm and surges outward. The blast is not a projectile but a flood, a directed tide of heat that slams into the engine's armor. Brass plating softens. Runes flare and sputter. The demon inside screams through Vox channels that turn into static as their circuitry melts. It tries to pull back, chain axe flailing to keep distance. The twilight sword cuts through the chain's links in one smooth sweep, severing the weapon from its arm. The axe crashes into the slag pit and sinks, hissing out a final puff of warp smoke. The war engine lunges with its clawed fist. Surtur catches the blow on his forearm. The impact would have broken titans. It only makes the chains on his arm rattle faintly. His grip closes around the engine's wrist, and strength beyond any mortal frame answers. Pistons rupture. Cables snap. The arm tears free in a shower of molten shards. The demon core howls and tries to flee through the warp, but the twilight sword is already moving. A thrust into the chest cavity pierces the furnace heart. Dark metal meets warp essence, and the connection implodes. The engine convulses, its runes flaring bright, then going dead. Its legs buckle. The massive frame collapses with a slow, grinding groan that shakes the canyon floor. Silence follows, broken only by the hiss of cooling brass and the distant echo of riots. Cultists nearby scatter, their faith collapsing into terror. Surtur stands amid the steam, the twilight sword dripping molten slag that evaporates before it can fall. A war engine meant to enslave him has been dismantled like kindling, and the Forge world's fires burn steadier in response. This victory is not the end of a battle, it is a signal. Chaos has learned the first lesson, and the Imperium has witnessed a flame that no longer fits their scriptures. The moment passes forward with a soft but heavy handoff toward the ritual that will try a different way to claim him. The canyon's heat does not cool after the war engine falls. Instead, it gathers into a deeper hush, as if the planet itself is listening for what comes next. Surtur feels a new pull in the air, not from machines or mortals, but from warp ritual coiling somewhere above. The storm has shifted. The demons that survived his earlier strike are no longer rushing him in blind hunger. They are drawing back, circling, watching. Chaos does not abandon a prize without trying to name it in its own tongue. A radical cult has taken shelter in a refinery cathedral on the canyon's upper lip. It is a place where Promethium once poured like blood into titanic cisterns, where priests sang to pipelines as to saints. Now the cathedral is defaced with brass sigils and flayed banners. The cult calls it the ever-burning heart, a warp relic stolen from some forgotten battlefield. Their leaders believe it is a shard of divine flame, a tool to bind any fire-born entity into Khorne's service. They do not understand that their gods only imitate what they cannot create. Surtur approaches the refinery without haste. The cultists sense him coming and begin their rite. Blood is spilled into furnace grates. Chains of chanting rise and fall in feverish cadence. The relic at the altar glows a sick red, feeding on frenzy. Warp energy thickens in the air, shaping itself into a net of burning runes meant to seize and command. The net falls over him like a mantle of heat that is not his. For a heartbeat, the air tightens, and in any other creature the warp would sink claws into soul. In Surtur, it finds something else. The eternal flame is not a warp phenomenon. It is older than the warp's hunger, older than any god who feeds on mortal emotion. The relic's fire touches his aura and is consumed as fuel, folded inward into a furnace already vast. The cultists witness their ritual fail and do not understand the direction of the failure. The ever-burning heart brightens, then fractures, sending a surge of power into him rather than into their control glyphs. Flame roars up his arms and through his spine. Heat in the refinery cathedral spikes beyond measurement. Promethium stores ignite without spark. Steel pillars glow, then sweat. The cultist's skin blisters as the air becomes too thick with fire to breathe. Surtur grows. Not by invention, not by transformation beyond what he has always been. The eternal flame parallel amplifies what already lives in him, the same way it did in his own realm. His size swells toward that Ragnarok scale, shoulders rising higher than refinery gantries, crown of fire sharpening into a blazing halo that makes lumen lights look pale. The twilight sword lengthens in the sense of it, not changing shape, but seeming more complete in hand that now matches its purpose. The refinery's ceiling cracks, beams bending outward, as if the building itself is trying to make room for an apocalypse. The cultists collapse in awe and terror. Some scream praises, still clinging to the idea that this is their god's gift. Others try to flee, their feet catching on molten grating. The warp around them recoils. Even the storm above thins for a moment, as if it has inhaled smoke too hot for its throat. Demons watching from the edges hesitate, their hunger sharpening into caution. In the close pull of Surtur's awareness, there is no confusion. Chaos tried to cage him with false flame and instead fed true fire. That mistake is almost pitiable, yet it is also instructive. The warp's power is vast, but it is not sovereign. It can only mirror, only corrupt, only swell by stealing shapes from mortal hearts. Against the eternal flame's kind, it is lesser. He steps out of the refinery cathedral enlarged, radiating heat that makes nearby slag pits boil. The forge world responds like a living thing, relieved to feel its true master rise. Reactors stabilize. Magma rises higher. The air across districts warms into a single, coherent blaze. His presence has become undeniable, and that undeniability draws a greater challenge. Somewhere above, a greater demon feels the shift and comes to test whether this fire is truly apocalypse. The moment hands forward into that approaching duel, heavy with the promise of a false god meeting a real ending. The warp storm parts over Hive Dominus like a wound opening with purpose. From the rupture descends a greater demon of corn, vast and winged, brass armor fused to muscle that steams with rage. Its axe is a slab of hate forged from 10,000 wars. Its whip trails embers that burn without oxygen. When it lands in the mid-hive plaza, Rock Creek cracks and bleeds molten slag. The roar that follows shakes gantries and sends crowds fleeing into side streets already half-collapsed by bombardment. Surtur feels its arrival as a spike of fever in the air, a warp heat that tries to drown everything else with sheer violence. The demon's mind is a furnace of hunger, convinced that all flame must either serve corn or be extinguished. It senses him as an anomaly, a rival blaze, and the rivalry curdles into certainty that his skull belongs on the blood god's throne. The plaza between them is a ruin of toppled statues and burning transport hulks. Citizens scatter in streamed panic. Imperial guard lines fall back into defensive rings, their commanders unwilling to fire into a duel they cannot understand. Surtur strides into the open, larger now, flame halo steady around head and shoulders, twilight sword held low like a promise. Around him, the air thickens and glows, not wild, but controlled by a will that has always known what endings look like. The greater demon charges first, wings snapping open, axe swinging down with enough force to cleave a battle tank. Surtur pivots aside with surety that does not need speed, and the blow crashes into the plaza floor, carving a glowing trench. The twilight sword rises in a clean arc and bites into brass armor at the demon's thigh. Warp ichor sprays in black ribbons that sizzle into ash as they fall. The demon reels, surprised that a blade not blessed by the warp can cut through warp-forged plate. Answers with its whip. The lash coils toward his torso, screaming with warp flames meant to bind and burn. Fire around Surtur swells and the whip's blaze folds into it, losing coherence as elemental heat consumes imitation. The lash strikes only air. He steps in close, sword driving toward the demon's chest. The creature twists with impossible agility, axe haft catching the blade mid-thrust. Sparks explode where dark metal meets warp enchantment. The plaza brightens like a forge about to burst. The demon pushes hard, trying to overwhelm by mass and fury. Surtur holds. The eternal flame in him is not anger without direction. It is wrath sharpened into purpose. One hand lifts, and a tide of fire surges upward from the plaza's molten cracks, wrapping around the demon's torso. It tries to drink that heat as warp creatures do, but the flame is too pure, too old. Its armor softens. Warp runes hiss and fail. Its wings curl inward as their membranes char. With calm certainty, Surtur advances through the blaze. The twilight sword finds the gap between neck and shoulder and drives deep. The demon's scream rips through the plaza, shattering windows for kilometers, yet the sound thins quickly as its tie to reality burns away. The sword's dark edge disrupts warp cohesion, severing the creature not by banishment but by annihilation. Its form collapses into a storm of ash and dying embers that the wind carries upward into the warp wound, as if even the storm wants it gone. Silence falls, not complete silence, because the Forge world never truly sleeps, but a hush in the plaza where every witness feels the impossible weight of what just happened. A greater demon has died by a fire that was not warp-fed and not sanctified by the Emperor. Imperial troops stare in stunned disbelief. Cultists who survived earlier rites feel their faith splinter. The storm above trembles, retreating for the first time since it trapped the world. Surtur stands in the crater where the demon died. Flame steadies around him. In that steadying is a clear message to both gods of blood and gods of iron. He is not a servant to be claimed. He is the apocalypse that decides. The galaxy has taken notice, and the moment hands forward softly into the next collision, the one that will come not from chaos, but from the Imperium's will to control what it fears. The plaza does not stay silent for long. In the Imperium, victory that cannot be explained becomes a new kind of threat. Across the mid-hive districts, Vox relays wake from storm static and carry the same impossible report. A giant of living fire has cut down a greater demon without warp sign or imperial blessing. The message reaches the command citadel, the Mechanicus synods, and the black channels of the Inquisition almost at once. Orders follow quickly, sharpened by a fear older than any battlefield, the fear of power outside sanctioned chains. Inquisitorial carriers punch through the thinning storm and settle among the upper spires, their hulls painted with warding sigils and the dull authority of holy terra. From them come stormtroopers in carapace black, Psychana adepts with hooded helms, and an inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus named Mael Vorn, robed in crimson and iron. Wards thrum around the retinue, designed to clamp down on demons, rogue psychers, and Xeno's sorcery alike. Yet even before entering the plaza, those wards begin to fail in subtle ways. Temperature regulators spike, hexagrammic seals peel at their edges, the air tastes too hot for any ritual to hold. Surtur watches them approach through slow heat haze. The giant's aura has settled after the duel, but the plaza still glows faintly with residual fire. Twilight Sword rests in one hand like a line drawn under history. The Inquisitor does not kneel. Inquisition does not kneel to anything except the Emperor's throne. His voice is steady and low through Vox amplifiers, naming the fire giant an unsanctioned anomaly and demanding submission for examination, for the Emperor's safety, for the Imperium's survival. No answer comes in their tongue. The response arrives as environment. The stone beneath the Inquisitor's boots warms until the soles begin to smoke. The stormtroopers' weapons soften at the muzzle, then warp at the receiver. A Psychana adept steps forward to lance a psychic net toward the giant, and the net evaporates the moment it touches the ancient heat around him. Warp tricks cannot find a purchase on a flame older than the warp's first hunger. The retinue opens fire out of reflex. Law's bolts vanish. Plasma bursts bloom and die without leaving a scar. The Inquisitor's wards flare bright, then gutter like candles in a furnace. In that failure, a calm certainty spreads through Surtur's awareness. These mortals are not his true enemy, only another face of stagnation, trying to chain what it cannot define. Their courage is real. Their purpose is small. A step forward from him ends the confrontation without slaughter. The plaza air thickens, pushing their line back in a slow, invisible tide. Armor plates glow. Breath becomes pain. The Inquisitor staggers, pride fighting survival, and finally signals retreat, not in surrender, but in recognition that force here belongs to a different order. As his retinue falls back into the spires, the Imperium's will has met a fire it cannot command, and the moment hands onward into myth, taking root faster than doctrine can smother it. By night cycle, V. Heralin Secundus no longer feels like a trapped world. The warp storm still churns above, but its pressure has thinned, wary now of a core that burns outside its rules. In the Manufactorum Hab blocks, workers whisper about the red giant who walked through molten corridors and left no demon standing. Guardsmen trade shaken accounts over ration fires, speaking of a blade that drank darkness and a flame that did not flicker with warp taint. Skidari patrol logs, scrubbed of emotion, still show the same outcome. Weapons failed, heat obeyed, demons died. The Mechanicus fractures around the story. One sect files emergency petitions to Mars, calling the entity a Hirdek god that must be eradicated if the Forge world is to remain loyal. Another sect, more radical and more desperate, begins to weave a different catechism. In their data prayers, the fire giant becomes the Omnissiah's wrath made flesh, a sovereign flame sent to purge warp corruption and renew iron through ordeal. Their rites change without permission. Incense burners are set before furnace mouths in a new pattern. Machine spirits are praised not for obedience, but for endurance in flame. Even those who resist the myth cannot keep it from spreading, because belief fills the gaps left by fear. In the wider hive, civilians form shrines in maintenance alcoves, placing melted cog teeth and seared purity seals as offerings. They do not know his name, and so they name him by feeling. Some call him the Red King of Fire. Others, under their breath, say Fire Father, a protector that burns monsters before they can reach the weak. The words are not doctrine. They are survival trying to become meaning. Chaos hears the myth too. Cult remnants crawl back into shadowed districts, shaken and half-broken. Their gods did not gift them a champion. Their gods were burned. That failure curdles into obsession. New warbands beyond the storm begin to shift course toward Warhammer Secundus, drawn by the scent of a flame that humiliated demons. Some want to corrupt it, some want to kill it, all want to understand it, because in the great game, any new power becomes a battleground. Surtur stands apart from the whispering. The Forge world's fires now lean toward him without shame. Magma pumps pulse in a steadier rhythm. The air across districts feels warmer, less poisoned by warp chill. Yet myth is a double-edged thing. The Imperium will try to fold him into prophecy or erase him in silence. Chaos will try to twist him into hunger. Neither will succeed. Myth is only the galaxy's way of admitting it has already changed. Across the sector, the first rumor drifts beyond the ghoul stars, and with it comes the soft handoff into a future where this fire cannot stay contained to one world. Dawn on Warhammer Secundus is a thin, angry light filtered through smoke and the storm's bruised clouds. The planet wakes into ruin that feels quieter than before, not because war has ended, but because something older than war has stepped into its rhythm. In the ash deserts, titans stand down from firing lines, their princeps waiting for orders that no longer match the battlefield's new reality. In the hive spires, void shields hum with steadier cadence, less strained by the warp's pressure. The Forge world has not been saved in any imperial sense. It has been claimed by a flame that does not seek permission. Surtur moves toward the surface heights where the air is open enough to taste the sky. Each step leaves a faint glow in the rockcrete that cools only after he passes. The twilight sword rests against his shoulder now, its dark edge quiet, not satisfied but ready. The blade knows there are greater walls ahead than any hive district, and it welcomes that truth. Beneath the calm exterior of his stride, purpose settles into something almost serene. Ragnarok was never a tantrum. It was a law of renewal. The old must burn so the next age can breathe. From these upper levels, the scale of the galaxy presses into awareness. The Imperium sprawls across a million worlds, paralyzed by faith and fear, bleeding endlessly to hold a shape that has already rotted. Chaos swells in every crack, promising change but delivering only another loop of hunger. Xeno's empires orbit the edges, patient, opportunistic, waiting for humanity's collapse. The entire machine of existence feels stuck between stagnation and frenzy, between a corpse throne and mad gods. It is the same pattern that once ruled Asgard's fall, now stretched across stars. Inquisitorial eyes watch from distant spires. Mechanicus priests chant new data litanies. Chaos warbands shift in the warp's currents. Every power in this sector is measuring the fire giant, deciding how to cage, corrupt, or destroy. None of those decisions matter as much as the one already forming in his furnace heart. This galaxy does not need a new god to worship. It needs a cleansing that leads somewhere, an ending that makes room for a beginning strong enough to endure. The storm above thins further, drawn back by forces it cannot name. In that thinning, a path opens off-world, toward other forges, other battlefronts, other thrones that have forgotten the price of weakness. Surtur lifts his gaze to the blooded horizon and the hidden stars beyond it. The eternal flame is steady inside him, and in that steadiness is a promise the Imperium will understand too late and chaos will understand too well. Ragnarok has entered the 41st millennium, not as a single battle, but as a direction. What rises from the ashes is not yet seen, but the galaxy can feel the heat of change coming, patient, vast, inevitable. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.